Hello and welcome to the Any Given Saturday podcast, because in this beautiful game that is college football, anything on any given Saturday can certainly happen. Just ask any team that was on the wrong end of an upset where they were favored by 30 to 40 points in those respective games. And guys, we are at a point where, as of the recording of this podcast, I'm recording this on July 24th in 2023. We are officially 32 days out from the first official Division One football games going underway. I'm surely excited for it. And even though that college football season isn't officially here yet, that O word that some people like to throw out, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think that exists unless you are in the land of casuals. But if you're listening to this podcast, I have a feeling that you're not one of those said casuals, because even though we are more than 30 days out from the start of college football season, we have quite a bit going on in this particular podcast here tonight. We are going to do a deep dive into the group of five. Last podcast, we jumped into the Power Five teams, talking about who could possibly win each conference at the Power Five level, the last year in which we will refer to such as the Power Five, with college football realignment, the main realignments going to be happening next season. So we'll dive into the group of five here in this podcast. But before we do that, we'll talk about Lane Kiffin's comments at SEC Media Day. He talked about his take on NIL, the transfer portal, and just the overall state of college football. Speaking of college football, we do get word from College Gameday where they are going to be making their first stop. We'll go ahead and talk about that, and I'll give my reactions to that particular announcement that was made on Twitter here on Monday morning. And then we had a comment. We had a comment in one of the podcast segments, a little bit of a prediction, a certain prediction about Arizona State football. We'll dive into how bold of a take is that actually is, or dare I say it, am I going to be on the same wavelength as this guy? So you're going to want to stick around for the whole thing. But guys, before we dive into it, what I would truly appreciate from the bottom of my heart, to help me do a couple of things real fast. It'll only take you a minute to do. I promise it will not take very long. I need you to hit that like button for me, because when you hit that like button, what that does is that you help spread this video out to other college football fans like yourself. And one thing that I would really love to see before we get into the actual start of college football season, I would love to reach 100 subscribers. And somehow, I would, if it's in the cards, hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of college football season. I believe in this little community that we're starting to grow here. I think we can make that happen, but you got to hit that like button first and foremost. And speaking of, hitting that like button, hit that subscribe button for me as well if you're brand new. Hitting that subscribe button would really help me out as well, so that we can grow said community. And all things considered, if you see this full podcast and you want a question, an opinion that you want me to answer upon, leave that question for me. Leave that prediction of yours in the comment section, and it will be featured on a future podcast. But all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started. We just had SEC Media Days last week. We saw SEC Media Days go down. I believe it was in Columbus, Georgia, but that's not exactly the point. The big thing that happened in SEC Media Day that at least garnered the attention of ESPN themselves is, Lane Kiffin, he gave his thoughts about NIL. He gave his thoughts about the transfer portal as well, and really just talking into the overall state of college football. And in doing so, he didn't even wait for those types of questions to be asked upon him. He went right into it in the opening statement. And if you want to see the full thing in the full context, I'll make sure to link it either in the description, or I'll have it as the comment down below for this video as well. But he talked about NIL, and what Lane Kiffin said, I agreed with some things and I disagreed with some things as well. We'll put it like that. We talked about NIL in the previous podcast, and I guess how we differ from what Lane Kiffin wanted to say about NIL is, he sees as a more negative aspect of college football. And, we see it as a little bit more of a positive light. And without jumping too terribly far into the NIL stuff, of course, that we dove into. And if you want to check out that podcast segment, there'll be a link somewhere in this video that you guys can check out at your later convenience, of course. But generally speaking, I still think that NIL can be a positive thing for college football. I think it'd be something that could add more parity in the long term, because we're still only a couple years into this thing. We don't know the full ramifications of NIL until 5-10 years from now. But just me speaking in general terms, the best way a student athlete can get NIL money is that they're actually starting, that they're actually contributing at the college level. And it's easier to do that at some of these lesser schools than maybe what you would get at a traditional blue blood, where typically as a true freshman, as a freshman redshirt, you're not starting. You might have to wait a year or two before that actually happens, at least for most athletes. But at a smaller school, that might not be the case. And I think it really could be the great equalizer. But more importantly, he talked about the transfer portal. And he talked about the transfer portal and talked about how essentially it's treated as if it's free agency. And the way that the NCAA rules are structured, I think they went a little bit too lenient on it. In my opinion, it's something that I always talk to my friends, my family, my coworkers about in terms of the transfer portal. So in the past, what would happen with the transfer portal is what you would have happen is, regardless of circumstances in terms of why you would go ahead and transfer, you would, no matter what happens, no matter what the reason is, you would have to sit out for a full season. You would lose a year of eligibility, but then after you sit out that year, you'll be eligible to play at your new school. But so then after that, I think it was a few years ago, the NCAA introduced a waiver where you would be eligible to play immediately. And it's gotten to a point where almost everyone that transfers is eligible immediately, unless there's a grades issue, like certain classes don't transfer over. So nowadays, you could transfer as many times as you want, and you could play immediately. The person that I think about a lot when I think of why maybe the transfer portal needs a little bit of change is JT Daniels. JT Daniels was somebody who started his career at USC, didn't pan out in his first 2 years at USC, where he actually was number 3 quarterback in the 2018 recruiting class. He was in the same recruiting class as Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. But for JT Daniels, it doesn't work out. He ends up transferring to Georgia. He was the starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs. That was a thing that did actually happen. And he couldn't stay on the field. He got hurt in those 2 years that he was at Georgia. Stetson Bennett took over, and, well, the rest is history with the Georgia football program. So after those 2 years at Georgia, he then transfers to West Virginia last season. Well, things didn't quite work out at West Virginia either. At the University of West Virginia, he ends up getting benched in the middle of the season as well. So now he enters the transfer portal. This would make it his 4th school in 6 years of college eligibility, because he got a medical redshirt year. And then he also got the COVID year because he was participating in college athletics in 2020. JT Daniels is now at Rice. He is now a member of the Rice Owls football team. So, and I think that's a perfect example why I do agree with Lane Kiffin in terms of maybe restructuring the transfer portal a little bit, right? Because, listen, my father always told me 2 of the biggest decisions that you make is where you end up going to college. If you do decide to go to college, of course, college is, of course, not for everybody, and who you decide to go marry. Well, in respect to the former, in terms of where you end up going to college, those kids that are making decisions, they're just that. They're kids. They're 17 years old. Some of them make their decision earlier, 15, 16 years old. You get the picture. They're kids either way that don't have fully developed brains. And just like all of us that is listening in or is even recording this particular podcast right now, we all make mistakes. None of us is perfect. So I don't want to say that you want to go back to the original NCAA transfer rules where you do have to sit out a year. I think that we should still give kids grace where if you don't like where you are, where you originally decide to spend your next 4 or 5 years, you should be able to transfer to wherever you want to go, regardless of whether it's in the same conference or not, and you should be able to still play immediately, at least the first time around. Now, after the first time, if you want to get to that second time or even later, then yes, I would absolutely advocate for having athletes sit out a year. I think that would help some with some of the turbulence that we see with the transfer portal. Who knows if the NCAA actually goes that route because they have very little power nowadays, but I think that alleviates some of the concerns that we have with the transfer portal that many of these coaches have, and also try to enforce better rules in terms of making sure that athletes are not being contacted until they actually are in the transfer portal. Because Coach Nardisi of Pitt, he mentioned, I believe the story was mentioned on the Wake Kick Show with Josh Pate. He mentioned that straight up Jordan Addison, who is now a wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, he was straight up tampered with. He called out USC because of that. So I think that would be something that the NCAA absolutely should look forward to. Probably won't see anything less than 30 days from college football season starting, but going into next offseason, I think the NCAA should absolutely look into that. And that's with all sports. That's not just with football. I think that's something that they should certainly look into for all college athletics. So now we'll go ahead and take time to get a little drink. Get a little drink from the cup. Gotta stay hydrated. I know it's hot in a lot of places around the country. Make sure you guys are staying hydrated, man. Seriously. But speaking of college athletics, I mentioned it earlier. I saw a tweet today. This tweet is from the official College Gameday Twitter themselves, and they announced where they're going for their first College Gameday on Saturday, September 2nd. This is from the College Gameday Twitter account themselves. They are going to Charlotte, North Carolina. They are coming to what they call the Queen City. Those of you that live in Cincinnati or close to Cincinnati would disagree that Charlotte's the Queen City, but not the point. They're going to Charlotte, North Carolina, and they will be there for the neutral side battle between North Carolina and South Carolina for the Duke Mayo's Classic. Now, this is not to see which winning head coach gets dunked with Mayo. No, kids. That is for the Duke's Mayo Bowl game, but that has nothing to do with the Duke's Mayo Classic, if that makes any sense. So, and some of the replies, I was always curious with what the replies say whenever that type of announcement is made. And I should have been a genie. I should have been one of those mind readers. I already know what was going to happen because they went right to it. How come Florida State and LSU, how was that not a college game day? How was that not warranted? Some of them said. Well, so for those of you that pay attention, college game day is usually on Saturday. And that neutral site game is not on a Saturday. That is actually on a Sunday night. That is on, what was it? We'll see here. September 3rd. That is on September 3rd. So September 2nd is the North Carolina and South Carolina game. And even though maybe not the same caliber team that Florida State and LSU is, still going to be a really good game. You first and foremost, you have a game that's going to be somewhat of a rivalry, some state pride there between North Carolina and South Carolina. Neutral site game there at the Carolina Panthers football stadium. You got that going as well. And then you also have two teams that played some very good football last year, but maybe going in different directions. So how things go about this season, we might get some more clarity about North Carolina and South Carolina. So North Carolina, very good season last year. They ended up going 9-5. They were 9-1 going into the November 19th game against Georgia Tech. But then starting with that Georgia Tech game, they end up losing their final 4 games of the season, losing to Georgia Tech, losing to NC State in overtime. Then they lose to Clemson in the ACC championship before finally losing to Oregon in the Holiday Bowl to those Oregon Ducks, a 1-point loss. 3 of those 4 games, by the way, were 1-possession losses, by the way. So we know how good Drake May is. Drake May is someone that we'll very well see in the NFL, likely a first-round pick. But the question with North Carolina is going to be, how good is that supporting cast for Drake May? How's that going to be? Because Drake May, not only was we know him as that passer, but he also led the team in rushing yards last season. So I'm looking to see how that supporting cast for North Carolina is, and they'll have a good test early on as they'll take on a South Carolina team from the SEC, 8-5, but they round off some really good wins towards the end of the year. They beat Tennessee, they beat Clemson, and they played Notre Dame pretty well on top of that. So South Carolina and North Carolina, they both finished in the top 25, all things considered. And when the initial preseason polls come out, I do expect both these teams to be in the top 25, and generally should be a good game to watch. So I know some of you guys might be disappointed for Florida State and LSU, and I'm certainly going to be watching that Florida State and LSU game as well. But South Carolina and North Carolina, that's going to be a fun game to watch. And shoot, depending on what happens, Spencer Rattler, he might mess around and be an NFL quarterback soon, depending on what happens this season. You really never know, and that's the beautiful thing about college football. So speaking of that college football, I got a comment. In my my comments section for one of the podcast segments. I think it was about I'm pretty sure it was the Pac-12. Someone coming in talking about some Arizona State football, talking about this Arizona State team. They're going to go 7-5 and 2 major upsets. So it had me wondering, what should we expect from Arizona State football in 2023? Are we on the same wavelength, or is this what some people would consider a bold prediction, right? That's something that I'm really curious about. So I have the Arizona State schedule pulled up on my computer screen. I have it set up on a different screen, and I have a graphic set up for you guys, hopefully, when this podcast actually does end up coming out. But with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and start taking a look at what that Arizona State schedule has to offer. What does this Arizona State team have going into that 2023 season, right? So first things first, let's talk about the Arizona State team in itself, going into the, kind of shaky ground for the Pac-12. And to put things lightly, Arizona State didn't have maybe what they wanted in terms of a college football season. They ended up going 3-9 this year, and it's going to be interesting to see how they get to that 7-5 with 2 major upsets. That's another part of that conversation as well. This is an Arizona State team that went 3-9, and Kenny Dillingham, he's the coach of Arizona State. He replaces Herm Edwards. Herm Edwards is no longer with the program. Actually got fired midway through the season, if my memory serves me correctly. So Kenny Dillingham, he's the new head coach of Arizona State, and it's going to be a rebuilding job. I think it's going to be a rebuilding job for Arizona State this upcoming season. This should be year 1 of the rebuild. Because as good as Herm Edwards might have been with X's and O's, he certainly wasn't the best recruiter by any means, and that's going to set the Sun Devils program back for 2 to 3 years, depending on how they're able to utilize the transfer portal. Because with what happened last year, not only are they missing some key contributors from last year, they also lost a significant amount in the transfer portal. And I have some concerns about this offensive line as well. In fact, I can't really sit back and tell you really what is a plus for Arizona State football, at least not off the top of my head right now. So that being said, Arizona State, by FBS terms, if you compare it over the entire FBS, they'll be okay, but comparing them to the Power 5 and how good this league's supposed to be this year. It's going to be a brutal league. We'll see. We're definitely going to see, but let's go ahead. Let's jump into this schedule for the Arizona State Sun Devils here in the year 2023 as well. And we'll start with August 31st. This would be their week 1 matchup. They host FCS Southern Utah. Now, for Southern Utah, I mean, FCS team, no one in the right mind 9 times out of 10 is going to pick an FCS team to win over an FBS squad. So we're not going to be sitting here and disrespecting Arizona State because I don't think they're going to be the worst Power 5 team in college football this year. I don't think that's going to be the case. So we'll give Arizona State a win against Southern Utah. So they'll be 1-0 going into their next matchup. Their next matchup, the following Saturday, is against Oklahoma State. They are at home for this game as well, and their first 4 games, they're actually at home, so that the start at least breaks out nicely to try to build some confidence. But for September 9th, they are going to be at home against Oklahoma State. Now, Oklahoma State, also a program that could be on a nosedive as well. They lost Shadir Sanders in the transfer portal. He is no longer with the team, quarterbacking this squad. They have some things that they need to work on themselves in terms of, okay, they got to make some better mental judgments because they made plenty of mental mistakes last year that did cost them games. They still went 7-6, but they certainly made some mental mistakes that you typically don't see often from Mike Gundy team. They also need to be able to stop the run. They were not good at stopping the run this year. And their offensive stars, they need some offensive stars to rise up and really contribute for this team because the Big 12 in Oklahoma State, it's going to be it's going to be a lot of offense in that conference. I have a feeling about that. But that being said, I think that Oklahoma State is still a better team to this point than what Arizona State is. I don't see the Sun Devils beating Oklahoma State. So we'll say that Oklahoma State beats Arizona State. That puts them at 1-1. Now we go to game number 3, another home game, this time against Fresno State. Now, Fresno State is a team that is actually the defending Mountain West champions, but this Fresno State team that did end up winning 10 games this year, this was a team that was veteran loaded last year. And not only was there some veterans on this team, but they were led by their quarterback, Jake Heiner. Might have butchered that. Please don't roast me too hard in the comments, but Jake Heiner, he is now in the NFL. I don't remember off the top of my head where he's with, but he is in the NFL and not quarterbacking Fresno State anymore. Several other important stars are no longer on the team either, mainly because of graduation. So I could see Fresno State taking a step back, and since this game is going to be at home as well, I actually think Arizona State wins this game. I think they beat Fresno State, although Bulldogs should still be a solid team in the Mountain West. I think Fresno State falls to Arizona State, so that puts them at 2-1 before they start conference play. And it's 9 games in the Pac-12. They play a 9-game conference schedule, and they open up again at home, but they take on USC. So USC, we know how good USC is. Went to the Cotton Bowl, nearly won the Pac-12. Lincoln Riley got them to over 10 wins, and they have the defending Heisman Trophy winner in Caleb Williams. So if there's any chance for Arizona State to beat USC, they really need to be able to keep up with the USC Trojans, and I don't see that, so that's going to be a loss. However, they go for the first time on the road. They'll take on the California Golden Bears. I think that's their full name, but they take on California team that also struggled. They went 4-8. They really didn't have much juice on the offensive side of the ball, and they really didn't have a pass rush as well. And so it's just a team that really needs some playmakers. I don't know if Cal has sent playmakers or if they're going to develop, but in a close game, I think Arizona State wins this one. We'll call it a little bit of, No, we won't necessarily call it a toss-up. I think Arizona State, I feel comfortable with picking them over Cal. So 3-2, nearing the halfway point in the season, where they host Colorado. Colorado in a similar state of trying to get its team right. They went 1-11, but Coach Prime is back. He not back, but he's with the program now. He's in his first year. Added a lot of new transfers. Colorado could very well be a wild card. And at the very least, they're going to be a fun team to watch. I think they're going to be a really fun team to watch. We'll see if they end up going bowling or not. I don't think it would be a fair expectation for Colorado to go bowling, because even though the roster itself might be more talented, you got a lot of parts in spring and summer ball that really need to gel and become a team, right? But in this hypothetical, we're halfway through the season, so Colorado would have to do some sort of gelling. And I'm going to say Colorado wins this game. I think Colorado beats Arizona State. We'll call this a toss-up, though, because it could really go either way. But I'm leaning towards Colorado winning this game. So that puts them at 3-3. And then these next 5 games that are on the schedule, it's going to be brutal. They're at Washington, and in the last pod, in pod number 1, I picked Washington to win the Pac-12. So if I can pick Washington to win the Pac-12, for that reason, it's fair for me to assume that Arizona State does not beat them on the road. So that's a firm L. Washington State is after that another Washington team. This is also a home game. But Washington State's an interesting team. They are actually a team that needs more out of its offense. The defense is actually better than their offense. That's a really weird thing to say in 2023. I hope I never have to say that again. Cameron Ward is back for Washington State, but the offensive line is also questionable for the Cougars. But if Cameron Ward is able to get some time and find rhythm, this could be a dangerous offense. I'm also going to pick Washington State to beat Arizona State. I'm going in that general direction. Utah and UCLA and Oregon, this is where it gets really difficult. This is not going to be a fun time for Arizona State fans, right? So at Utah, Cameron Ward is, well, not Cameron Rising. Cameron Rising is back. Utah, a team that is the defending Pac-12 conference champions. I don't see them beating Arizona State. UCLA also has a pretty talented roster. Chip Kelly did a pretty good job of loading up in the transfer portal. UCLA is going to be good again. They may not have DTR, but UCLA is going to be a good team. They might also be in that conversation to go to the Pac-12 championship game. So don't sleep on the UCLA Bruins. That being said, Arizona State's on the road. I'm calling that an L for them as well. Oregon also going to be really tough, led by Bo Nix. We know how good this Oregon team is. They also, but they did end up losing quite a bit on both sides. So they do have Bo Nix, but Bo Nix is going to need some of the younger guys on this roster. Talented guys, for sure, because Dan Lanning's done a pretty good job recruiting up there in Oregon, but unproven guys. But at this point in the season, I expect Oregon to be firing on close to maybe what their ceiling is for the season. And I don't think Arizona State can match that either. So that's going to be another loss. Which brings me to the Bring Back the Cup, the rivalry game to end the season. Arizona is the rival of Arizona State, the main rival. This is their final regular season game as well. And Arizona, they almost made it to a bowl game last year, 5-7. They did lose quite a bit in the transfer portal, but this can possibly be a dangerous team if depending on how the defense performs this year. So there's some promise on the Arizona Wildcats squad. Don't know if that'll lead them to a bowl game or not, but I do also have Arizona beating Arizona State. So let's see what we're working with. We picked Southern Utah to win. We got a Fresno State win, a Cal win as well. But after that, really no more wins. The only toss-up that we had was Colorado. So that being considered, So right now, I'm checking on FanDuel right now, and I'll have that graphic up as well, showing what the FanDuel is saying. So Arizona State's win over under is at 4.5 wins. And going through their schedule, just based off of how I'm feeling and doing some research of my own prior to this pod, the floor of this team is 3 wins. They'll at least not do worse than 3-9, but I don't see them going more than 4-8. So I don't really see, I don't see 5 wins on the schedule. I just don't see it. So if I'm betting on the Arizona State regular season over under, it is currently at 4.5 based off of what I'm seeing right now on the FanDuel website. This is as of July 24th. I would be more comfortable going with the under, but that's just my opinion. Let me know in your comments in the comment section what you guys think of Arizona State's football aspirations in 2023. Man, my throat gets really dry. I'll tell you what, guys. It ain't easy. You know, we're already at 2 sips of the cup here, and we drink a good deal of water. Well, we're definitely being hydrated for sure. So last week in the first ever pod of Any Given Saturday, what we decided to go over was the Power 5 teams, the Power 5 conferences. We broke them down by each individual conference, right? We did all that, and we broke it down, and we gave our thoughts to who we think we are going to see win each individual conference. So we did that for the Power 5 last week, and now we jump into the other conferences, the group of 5, because we don't discriminate. You know, we're not afraid to talk about the group of 5 on this particular podcast. But before we jump into it, I hate asking you guys to do this. I really do. But I was checking the YouTube analytics, and over 90% of you guys that watch this podcast are not subscribed to this channel. So if you're enjoying yourself and this is not your first time, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button. I would really appreciate that. But now that soapbox is out of the way, well, what we're going to do, we're going to go through each conference in individual order. So what we'll do is we'll go through the American Conference first, and then move over to Conference USA, the MAC, the Mountain West, and then close out with the Sun Belt. So all that being considered, the first 2 conferences that we're going to talk about, starting with the American, and this is a starting point for future me that's going to edit this down to segments later, but the American Conference was one of those conferences that had arguably the most turbulence of any team, of any conference in major Division I college football. So there was a lot of changes to the American Conference this year, a lot of change that did see not only Cincinnati, but also UCF and Houston. They all departed from this conference, and taking their place, you got UTSA, you got North Texas, Rice. Rice is also in the American Conference as well. And we also have UAB and Charlotte. I believe Charlotte is joining the American Conference as well. So that bolsters up to the Americans, who I believe is about 14 teams now. More than enough to have a conference championship game, but it leaves a power vacuum. It does leave a power vacuum, and leaves opportunities for, new teams to possibly cement themselves as perennial top dogs of the American, because before that Tulane game, 4 of the last 5 conference champions prior to Tulane winning it in 2022 was either UCF, or it was a Cincinnati, or it was Houston, as well. So just some food for thought there. 5 of the last 7, if you want to go back 7 years. So that being said, a lot of new opportunities. And speaking of that Tulane team, I know Tulane is going to be a darling, not only the American Conference, but a lot of people's pick to be one of the best Power 5 teams, or not Power 5, excuse me, but one of the best group of 5 teams in all of college football this year. But here's the thing with Tulane, okay? Tulane had a great season. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to give them their flowers for a minute, and then I'm going to explain why I'm not looking at Tulane to win the American this year. So they went 12-2. They won the American. They also won the Cotton Bowl. They beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. So, I'm not saying that Tulane is going to have this earth-shattering go back to earth and suddenly have a really difficult time competing for a bowl game. I'm not saying that as well. But they did lose a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. And for most programs, this is not just Group of 5. This is also for the Power 5 as well. It's hard for most programs to replace said talent and then maintain that same level of play. So Tulane, notably on offense, they lost Tyjae Spears, but they also lost several key defenders as well. So they lost some firepower. They lost some key defenders that contribute. And again, I'm not saying that Tulane is going to be bad. I'm not saying that at all. I just have a hard time expecting Tulane to win double-digit games again. And that's also why I'm really looking into a different direction. One team that might be a little bit of a dark horse this upcoming season, and that team is a team that did join the American Conference, coming from Conference USA this year. And that's the UTSA Roadrunners. Now, for those of you that didn't pay as much attention to the UTSA Roadrunners, this UTSA squad quietly has also been one of the best Group of 5 programs out there. They not only are coming off a Conference USA championship, they are the 2-time defending Conference USA championships. And technically, they'll always be able to defend that title because no one's going to be able to, take it away from them on the field, at least not in Conference USA. So they have that in their bag. They went 11-3 last year as well, so another 10-win team. They actually went into bowl season ranked in the top 25. They did lose to the Troy Trojans in the Cure Bowl. Now, Troy themselves was also a really good team last year, and they did actually finish in the AP top 25 to end the season. But this is why I really believe that UTSA could really make some noise. Frank Harris is back. Frank Harris, dude, is absolutely prolific. I think he threw for close to 4,000 yards. This is a solid quarterback. This is a really good quarterback, and this is a really good football team as well. A really good team that's got its quarterback back, and I'm looking at their schedule right now in terms of the American Conference. I really like how their schedule breaks out. I mean, maybe some teams that could be in their same tier as them, SMU, Memphis, East Carolina, those types of teams. I really do like where the schedule stacks up because they get Eastern Carolina at home. They don't have Memphis on their schedule, and they don't have SMU on their schedule as well. So for the most part, they will actually be taking on lesser teams, most of which teams that they already beat back when they were in Conference USA. So they already got that. And the teams that are actually experienced American teams, Temple, I'm not really concerned about them handling Temple, even though that's a road game. We also have South Florida. South Florida's in a rebuild. Really, the key, I could see UTSA winning every single game in the American Conference. The one game that could give them some trouble is the last regular season game. They are on the road against Tulane. That game could really determine whether UTSA is hosting or do they got to go back to New Orleans the following week. And if they're playing in the American Football Championship, go back to New Orleans. Because I've been to an American Conference Championship game at UC, and Cincinnati had that thing sold out. It was absolutely electric. Houston technically gets half the tickets. So like the home team and the away team, they both get 50% of the tickets. But if the away team can't sell theirs, they give them to the home team and distribute the rest of them out. So it was started out as a 50-50 split at my time at University of Cincinnati, not at the University of Cincinnati as a student, but being there at the American Conference Championship game, it turned to be like a 90-10 split. Absolutely electric atmosphere. Would be the same thing at a Tulane or at a UTSA if either of them got to host the American Conference Championship. But that being said, I really, really like this UTS team this year. And some people, a lot of people are writing them off because Tulane is in this conference because of what they did last year. But last year is in the past. This year is a new year. This year is a new day. And because it is a new day, give me UTSA walking into the American Conference and winning their first American Conference championship, year one in the American. So we've talked a lot about former Conference USA teams, but let's talk about the actual Conference USA themselves. We talked a lot about the realignment in the American and how the American replaced those teams was the teams from Conference USA. As stated earlier, Rice, UTSA, Charlotte's gone too. UAB is gone. Rice is gone. And for Conference USA, they added some teams. They certainly added some teams. Most notably, they added Liberty. Liberty, had some good moments for sure. They also did add New Mexico State. New Mexico State, like Liberty, was an FBS independent. And then they also added 2 new FCS teams as well. They added Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State coming up from the FCS ranks. And then they also added Sam Houston on top of that, another FCS. So there's only 9 teams in the Conference USA this year. They will be up to 10 when Kennesaw State joins them next year, but only 7 of these teams will be allowed to go bowling if they meet the minimum requirements to being bowl eligible, right? So Conference USA, you can easily make the argument that it's going to be the weakest conference in FBS football this year. That's just how it is. Conference USA is not in a good spot right now. They actually could be on the verge of really not existing, kind of taking that Western Athletic Conference route, if that makes any sense. So we saw UTSA that they also left, and UTSA won the last 2 conference championships. So again, another power vacuum in the Conference USA who takes advantage. And one team that I look towards in particularly that I think is head and shoulders above the rest of his conference right now. Now, we'll see what happens to Jacksonville State. We'll see what happens to Sam Houston. But if it's like the Sun Belt and what they're doing to James Madison, they probably won't be eligible to win the conference championship in their first couple of years. I'm really looking at Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky, it was a team that nearly won 10 games last year. They finished 9-5. Their quarterback, Austin Reed, did stuck around. So the passing attack for Western Kentucky, and that's really the bread and butter, is Western Kentucky is going to have an amazing passing offense. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch this upcoming season. The schedule for Western Kentucky is really interesting because they have, what is it? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, they still have 8 conference games. So it's round robin, so everybody will play everybody. So they don't get the benefit of being able to avoid a certain team, but this Western Kentucky team, they should be able to take full advantage. I don't think, maybe Liberty could challenge, maybe even a New Mexico State. New Mexico State's got a fantastic head coach. Hats off to them. But there's really only 7 teams that can actually compete for this conference championship this year. So it's really just based off of who's actually still left that's somewhat relevant. And Western Kentucky, I think, is certainly that team. So I would go with Western Kentucky to win Conference USA this year. So we have 3 more conferences left to cover. We got the MAC, we got the Mountain West, and we got the Sun Belt to wrap up tonight's podcast. So all things considered, let's go ahead and jump to everyone's favorite little engine that could, the MAC Conference. The MAC Conference is a it's a little engine that could. Everyone that is more diehard, enjoys the Tuesday and Wednesday night action in the middle of the season, especially when they get into college football season. And last year, Toledo did win the MAC championship. But not only did this team win the MAC championship, the Toledo Rockets, this Toledo Rockets squad, they return with a lot of experience from this team, right? So Toledo return pretty loaded. A lot of veterans that were on this team, including quarterback DeQuan Finn. Well, he'll be back, and DeQuan Finn should be one of the MAC's best quarterbacks that the MAC conference has in 2023. He's certainly a person to watch out for in terms of dynamic players. And Toledo, they had the number 1 defense last year, but could use a little bit of tuning. There could always use a little bit of tuning for sure. But still really good defense because, again, they are a team that is going to have the opportunity to try to repeat. And I think there's one school that could, well, I guess there's a couple of schools that could challenge. Well, I guess 2 or 3. Could be Ohio, Eastern Michigan, and Miami. I think are the other schools to watch out for. But Ohio lost a lot on defense. So even though they were a 10-win team last year, I could see Ohio taking that step back. Eastern Michigan, they went 9-4, but they're a veteran-loaded team that lost a ton of those key parts because they were veteran-loaded last year. And I have concerns about the pass rush at Eastern Michigan. On top of that, at Miami, we'll have to see. I have some questions about that offensive line. And, if you don't have a great offensive line, I don't see how you can, have great success, right? So I really like Toledo. I do like Toledo. There is going to be some games that are going to really determine how things shake out for them this year. 2 in particular. October 21st, they're on the road against Miami. And then November 8th, that is a Wednesday. Like I said, Wednesday night action, they'll be playing Eastern Michigan. They'll be playing against the Eastern Michigan Eagles. I think those 2 games could really determine whether they're going to the MAC championship or not and competing for that repeat. But I like this Toledo team overall, and I think they can certainly do some special things. So that takes us now to the opposite side of the country. We now go ahead and take a look at the Mountain West. The Mountain West was a team that we saw Fresno State win last year. And we talked about Fresno State earlier in this podcast. Fresno State was a team that went 10-4. They won the Mountain West title, but they lost several important stars. They lost their quarterback to the NFL as well. So I now look in a different direction in terms of who I think could win the Mountain West. And there was another team in the Mountain West that actually did end up winning 10 games last year. And that was the Boise State Broncos. Boise State went 10-4 this past season as well. And Talon Green, man, that's a name that you are going to remember by the end of this year. He is going to have some highlight plays. Not a lot of people know his name outside of Boise, Idaho, but man, he's going to make a name for himself this year. The running game for Boise State, particularly over in the second half of the season, really improved. So by the end of the year, Boise State had a very balanced offensive attack. And if they had that early in the year, maybe we're talking about them as MAC conference champions, possibly. But with that being said, that's why I really like Boise State this year because the other comparable teams, Fresno State, they did lose quite a bit of talent. Air Force, we'll see about Air Force. Air Force could, in fact, challenge Boise State, but the benefit about Boise State and Air Force is that they will have Air Force at home, so that will really help them. So Air Force could be a dark horse as well to win the Mountain West, but leaning towards Boise State because of the fact that they are indeed going to be home for that. And then San Diego State, I just think there's a lot of questions. They lost a lot of parts on defense. They need to tune up their offense around their quarterback, Jalen Menden, and that was before they lost a 4-star in the transfer portal, one of their offensive linemen. He's now at Ohio State. So, yeah, there's going to be a few teams that will, possibly compete with Boise State. But I really like the Boise State Broncos this upcoming season. Big question for them is whether they make a New Year's Six Bowl or not is, what they do against the likes of a Washington, because that's going to be their biggest game that they'll have the entire season, that week 1 matchup against Washington. And that just now leaves the final conference that I wanted to talk about here tonight on the podcast, the Sun Belt Conference. And before I jump into it to give my thoughts on who I think is going to win the Sun Belt Championship this year, I do want to give a special salute, a special shout out to James Madison. Now, James Madison, in their first year of FBS football, they made their transition from the Colonial Athletic Conference in the FCS ranks, and now they are here at the Sun Belt, and they went 8-3. They actually put together a really good year this past season. They really did. They really did manage to do just that, right? So, unfortunately for James Madison, they were not bowl eligible. And not only were they not eligible, they were a team that, because of the fact that they weren't bowl eligible, they were not eligible to go to the Sun Belt Championship. So they tried to send in a waiver that would allow them to, get that removed earlier. They are in year 2 of 2 of that, but all things considered, just a tough look. It's a tough look for sure. They did end up getting denied, is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah, so James Madison will not be competing for a Sun Belt title. They will not be competing for a bowl game either. And I think that's a shame. And I think that's a topic of conversation for another pod, because I don't want to get too deep into this rant. But long story short, I don't like it. So I got to look at other teams in terms of who I really like, in terms of who I think is going to win the Sun Belt this upcoming season. Now, a lot of people are going to be gushing over Troy. And, Troy, they had a great season last year. Like Tulane, they went 12-2. There's going to be a lot of preseason love for the Troy Trojans. But I have a couple of concerns about this Troy Trojan squad. This was a team that was built on its defense last year, and they lost some key guys on defense. And I also had concerns about how they didn't have a consistent running game, and because of the fact that this defense kind of carried the team, and now they can't rely as much on that defense. So this offense that didn't have that much of a running game, they didn't have the balanced offense. They need to get it together on the offensive side of the ball. So Troy's going to have a good season. Don't get me wrong. I still like Troy, but I don't think they're a 12-2 team. I don't think they repeat for the Sun Belt Conference Championship this year. I don't see it. I do not see it. But there's a couple other teams that I could be looking at in terms of possibly winning the Sun Belt this year. Could it be South Alabama? Could it be a Coastal Carolina or even a Marshall? Marshall is now, by the way, in the Sun Belt. They are here and they are proud. But I look at another team in the Sun Belt, another team that did win 10 games last year. They were not there to conference championship, but they did win 10 games last year. South Alabama is that team that I'm thinking of in terms of who I'd really like to see win the Sun Belt Championship this year. And I like what they got going on. So this is a team that had a very good defense of their own last year. And not only will their defense still be good, the ground attack should be stronger. We have a good indication that South Alabama is going to be a team that is going to be better on the offensive side of football, and their defense is about the same. So South Alabama was not too far from surpassing Troy in the conference standings. It went down to them playing in 2022, and it was close. It was a 6-10 loss at Southern Alabama, but it was a 4-point loss. It could have really gone either way. And now we're looking at a situation where, okay, Troy is probably a little worse than last year, but South Alabama, meanwhile, they might be the same, or they might be a little bit better. Dude, South Alabama, this could be a team that not only wins the Sun Belt, but they could also be a team that could flirt with 10 wins yet again this year. I truly believe that from the bottom of my heart. I think this team could potentially win 10 games, including the bowl game. 2 years in a row that would happen. And that would be an extremely big accomplishment for the South Alabama program, because South Alabama has not been playing football for too terribly long at all. They don't have a lot of that quote unquote recent history. So I think that's certainly possible. I think that's an irrelevant possibility. And if I had to pick today, yeah, I would pick the South Alabama Jaguars to win the Sun Belt this year. Now, that being said, a couple of dark horses to watch out for. Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina does have Grayson McCall back. Defense does need to be a lot better. Marshall, they'll have a good ground game. Their ground and pound defense should be very good, but passing attack has to be more consistent. Yeah, those two, and then James Madison. James Madison can't compete for the Sun Belt Championship, but they could certainly mix some things up. Well, that's for sure. But guys, it has been fun. It has been fun talking about college football here. 32 days. That is it. 32 days as we're recording this podcast, of course. Between now and the start of college football season is right around the corner. It's been a long summer. I know it's been a long summer for some of you. Shoot, it's been a long summer for me. But it's almost here. And our favorite time of year is right around the corner. So with that being said, guys, getting ready to wrap things up, but I appreciate you listening to this entire podcast. If you made it all the way through, first of all, thank you. I truly appreciate that. As we do have a new webcam on the way, the webcam that I originally was going to use for this podcast, it has moved on to Electronic Heaven. So new webcams on the way, so that you don't see my, avatar all the time. You actually get to see me in the flesh talking about college football, get to see my facial reactions. But with that being said, guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, please do me a favor. Smack that like button for me. I would truly appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. And if you're brand new to the channel and you really love college football, like I love college football, and you're excited about college football being back, hit that subscribe button for me. I would truly appreciate that. I really would. And if you have a question that you want me to give an opinion on that is college football related, or even a prediction that you wanted to throw out onto the World Wide Web, leave that in the comments section for me. I love reading your guys' comments. I love interacting with all you guys. I do read all the comments, and I do try my best to interact with you guys on some level. Maybe not necessarily, I won't respond to all of them, but I will read and interact with all of them. That is a promise for me. But with that being said, guys, I hope you guys all have a wonderful day. The day that all you kings deserve. And with that being said, I'm your host, Jake. we're going to sign off, and I'll see you guys next Monday as we draw closer to that awaited start of college football. Good night, everybody.